Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this evening's lecture, Call Me If You Get Lost by Germane Barnes as part of our summer public program. Just so you know, these lectures run in parallel to the 2021 edition of the AA Summer School, which is titled What Now? Agents of Care, as a response to the unexpected spatial, social, and political conditions that architectural practices, as well as education, are now facing. The aim is to build upon the emerging collective experience that the pandemic has cultivated and to enable collaboration, hope, and creative experimentation. In keeping with this theme, these lectures broaden some of the topics explored within the summer school units this year to a wider audience. And tonight's lecture does just that through presenting research that Germane has been developing that explores architecture and identity. Tonight's talk, Call Me If You Get Lost, explores the domestic realm, featuring projects in Miami, Florida, where Germane's practice studio Barnes is located. The lecture will focus on celebration, ritual, family, and love through the Black spatial occupation of the front porch. Tangent to the lecture is a film, You Can Always Come Home, which we'll see towards the end of the talk, that furthers the investigation and liberation of Blackness in the architected environment, dispelling common tropes of trauma, pain, and discrimination while promoting joy, delight, and self-care. To tell you a bit more about Germane, through mining architecture's social and political agency, he examines how the built environment influences Black domesticity. Currently, he's an assistant professor and director of the Community Housing Identity Lab at the University of Miami School of Architecture. He's the 2021 Harvard GSD Wheelwright Prize winner, Rome Prize Fellow, and winner of the Architectural League Prize, among many other accolades. And his design and research contributions have been published and exhibited in several international institutions, including MoMA, Pinup Magazine, the Graham Foundation, the New York Times, DesignMIAMI, Art Basel, and the National Museum of African American History, to name a few. Above all, we invited him to be part of this series, and it's fitting that he closes out the Summer School's public program as an excellent example of what it means to be an agent of care. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Germane, but if you have any questions throughout the lecture, please post these in the chat and I can ask them on your behalf following his talk, or else use the raise hand function and I can unmute you to ask a question during that section. So on that note, please join me in welcoming Germane to the virtual AA.
That was an amazing introduction. It also made me realize I need to shorten half of that stuff because it's so long. But I'm excited to be here. I was just explaining how I have a former student that's finishing up her time at the AA currently. I've always been a fan of the institution. The 3 times I've visited the UK, each time I've went to go visit and buy something from your bookshop. So I've always been a fan of the school. I wasn't good enough to get in when I was younger, but I'm sure if I applied again now, I have a pretty good shot of actually making it there. So, keep that in the back of my mind. That said, we're going to jump into this lecture. I promise that it will not be extremely long. I am anti-long-windedness on Zoom, so let's get to it. So the title of the lecture is Call Me If You Get Lost. Some of you who might be Tyler, the Creator fans know he has an album that just came out called Call Me If You Get Lost. And I thought it was appropriate because a lot of the work that I do is centered around a search for architectural identity. And it's always been a search for my own identity within the profession, within the discipline, within the architecture environment. So I think the best way to explain how I found myself and how I hope you all be able to find yourselves is back to my thesis project. And so I like to say that my work is more than just architecture. It's a combination of architecture, anthropology, identity, and politics. And so you'll begin to see various projects that I'll be showing fall within one of these categories as an adjacency to architecture. So understanding that architecture will always be present, but some are more anthropological than political, some are more identity than anthropology, et cetera. So I'll start with the Symbiotic Territories project, which is the thesis project that launched me on the current trajectory. That project combines all of these topics of anthropology, identity, and politics into one cohesive proposal that was all born as an act of refusal when I was in graduate school. And so my idea was go through thesis prep, do something extremely fun. This is at the time before Kanye West went crazy. So I'm super excited about that, the potential of blending my culture of Blackness, hip hop, and architecture. I was like, I'm gonna do the coolest thesis ever. I'm gonna win the thesis prize just based off this thing. I'm gonna have vinyl records, I'm gonna have sneakers, graffiti. It's gonna be amazing. And so during thesis prep, we had to come with the architectural credentials that allowed us the sort of wherewithal to do these things and put forth our proposal. And my professor at the time made a comment that race and architecture had nothing to do with each other, that race and architecture were completely independent, that studies of race was relegated to the anthropological experts, the sociological experts, and not the architectural experts, to which I completely changed my thesis and said, well, from this point forward, I'm just going to prove you wrong for the rest of the semester. So I'm going to take on, this is my new thesis. Sorry, hip hop and architecture. Sorry, Kanye, fellow Chicagoan. I got to let you down. I'm going to go ahead and do this thing instead so I can prove this professor wrong and then piss him off in the process. So I began to think about the way that I experienced the built environment. And as a young Black male growing up on the west side of Chicago, I went to elementary schools in very affluent areas. And when I was traversing the city and understanding the spatial dynamics, I often found myself code switching or reducing my Blackness to feel as though I can fit into those other spaces. So I took that abstraction of my physical experience and added it to the facade of this housing complex, because in the end, we still have to do architecture. So on this image, the graphic origins diagram, you see a simple block that's been manipulated by this black strip, and that black strip, where if I'm in a public sphere, would be completely Black. But however, in more public areas, that Blackness is reduced. And then it retreats to the interior, and you see how it manipulates the walls and the floor plans. And so this was born out of research that I did through the US Housing Administration, where unfortunately, according to the US government, if you have certain social programming, you have a better chance of being a quote unquote good American. And some of those resources are early childhood education, high school education, health resources, open parks, et cetera. And so the part that made the project critical was I took these different organizational strategies of architecture, blended with my own personal identity, and then applied them to a brand new social housing development. And what made the project provocative was I placed that housing project in the richest area of Los Angeles. Because what many people understand is a lot of people identify as progressive. When you put their feet to the fire, you often find their true sort of motives at that juncture. It's, I want to help you from a distance. I want to help you in your neighborhood. I don't want you in my backyard. So I took one of the AA's sort of historical thesis of RIM, of this superstructure across the city, and said, what if I put this in the richest area and then made this massive architecture and then just dropped it in this cul-de-sac? And said it doesn't adhere to the streets, it doesn't adhere to local zoning codes, it will destroy all the houses, and the individuals who say we don't want this in our area, you are now forced to live in this housing development, which is a true mixed income, because those with affluence are paired with those from poverty. Needless to say, this did not go over well with my professors. There were many times during jury presentations, I was told my project was racist. I was told that my project was wrong. And when I was told it was racist, I literally fired back at the professor and said, in the United States of America, I am Black. I don't have the power to be racist. It can be bigoted. It can be prejudiced, but I literally cannot be racist as a Black man. Please understand the words you're using before you start throwing them around at people all willy-nilly. She was not happy about that, but it was the honest truth that needed to be spoken. Tangent to this proposal, all of the criticisms I was receiving through my various juries, none of them actually centered on the project itself. So at the evening, I would write these small little articles to myself around the things I wanted to say during my jury presentations that I never got around to. And so that's how Arc Times was born, sort of a political proposal to all of my professors who I felt as though weren't giving me a fair share. And so I literally took all the comments from my respective juries and turned those into articles. So at the top, on the right-hand side, you can see Not in My Backyard. That was from the same woman that called my project racist. On the left-hand side, the city divided. Another juror said that. And so I made all of these articles. I wrote them all. So I would get to the studio at 9 a.m., work until 9 p.m., so 12 hours straight. And then from 10 until 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd write these articles. I have one article where it's a discussion with the architect. I was having a conversation with myself because I felt as though the only person to give me a true jury is me, because I understand this proposal. So I asked myself the questions I wanted to be asked, and I wasn't fortunate enough to get asked by my jurors. I won the thesis prize. When I handed this out to all the professors, they were completely blown away, separate from the actual proposal itself. And this sort of became the launching point to the rest of my work. And that same pre-thesis advisor who said to me, you can't blend the two, pulled me to the side and said, I don't know how you pulled it off, but you have something here. Submit this for awards, submit this for things. You have a body of work that you can put forward that can give you for the rest of your career. And the other woman that called my project racist literally cried real tears at my review. And what she said was, I didn't realize that this was your sort of life story. I didn't realize that this was a personal narrative. I didn't realize that this was your personal narrative. And it makes so much more sense, to which I shot back and said, this isn't my personal narrative. I did this because he pissed me off. And I just wanted to do something that would make him eat his words. And then she said, no, look at this project. This is you. And I took a step back. And when I finally did the whole thing, I said, holy shit, you're right. This really is me. This is literally my everyday experience in the architecture world. And so I had to continue along that thread. And so I jumped forward and started to think, what are the projects that I speak to? What are the things that I understand? What are the things that my culture has put within me? And so that's where dark mode comes from. And so dark mode is an exploration into anthropology and identity through the front porch. And so I received a Graham Foundation grant, travel grant, to go around to 5 cities that all have a relationship to the Great Migration. For those who don't know, the Great Migration is the largest exodus of Black people from one part of the United States to the other. So this was from around 1910 to 1950s. A lot of Black people moved from the South to the North as a result of Jim Crow era South, and they landed in big, larger metropolitan cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Philly, New York. And so this is the South side of Chicago. And you can look and you see all these various porches that are right next to each other. And many individuals were here doing these things. And as you can see, the housing standards weren't the best. This is called a kitchenette. The kitchenette is an area where it's an entire family in a single room. Again, entire family in a single room. So if you can imagine a 3-bedroom apartment, that would have 3 separate families inside of it, all sharing the same amenities. Now in 2021, we call that co-living. We've given it a very cool name. We've rebranded it. We found a way to say, how do we reduce our carbon footprint? How do we share a kitchen? How do we share a community space? In these days, it wasn't that glamorous. It was an entire family, not a single individual. There was inadequate heating, inadequate cooling, inadequate resources. And so I was learning these stories around why were people occupying their porch? Literally because their interior spaces were too confined. And you begin to see historically, this is 1941, people outside on their steps, because how do you extend the depth of your interior? You use that liminal space of the porch and the porch steps. And this is where people began to occupy. And these are stories that found their way from the South to the North, that regardless of climate, these type of rituals are always present. And these are the things that I still do with my family and friends when I visit home. It's all exactly the same. And so it's all there. It's all exactly the same, right? There's these stories and these legacies that we find within ourselves that continue through generation to generation to generation. So again, anthropological, the occupation of space, not just the construction of space. And so with that travel grant, I went around to 5 cities: Atlanta, DC, Chicago, Houston, Detroit. 5 distinctly Black cities. 5 cities with a huge porch culture, 5 cities with their own architectural language. And so you can see through this sort of grid of images, there's some historic images embedded with some current images. I went around the entire country taking these photos of different porches, different activities on porches. And so how do I celebrate these activities? How do I bring them to the forefront? How do I tell the story and the legacy of many individuals who come before me? And so we created this project. And so we tried to find a way to make it contemporary. And so we blended these different moments of gestures, actions, and positions. So positions are various locations of Black Miami. So these are areas across the city that are either formal porches or informal porches, right? And a lot of these places are contested. So if you look at positions, there's the underline. The underline is Miami's version of the High Line. It's underneath the railway. And what makes it contested is when it travels through Black neighborhoods, it disappears. When it travels through more affluent areas, it reappears. South Beach is contested because anyone who identified as Black was not allowed to access South Beach until the 1980s, freely. Virginia Key Beach was a Black-only beach that we were allowed to occupy. Without a racial identification card, you could not visit any of these locations. Then there's other places like Opelika City Hall, Little Haiti Cultural Complex, which are exemplary examples of Blackness. And then once you pair those with the things that are done on the porch, some people smoke weed, some people do photo shoots, some people have a fight, you play with toys, you get these various forms. And so we created a script, and that script Boolean elevation and plan views into these masses. And so we're calling these totems. And so these totems are the physical representation of those actions through this computational exercise. So again, trying to blend architecture plus these various stories. And then we put those across these extremely elegant Black lacquer models that is 16 feet long across the 16 sites. And so each one of these tells the story of what is done on a porch, whether formal or informal, in these various neighborhoods. So you can see they take on their own sculptural quality when put next to each other. They become their own object, even though they're 16 individual objects. The maps in the background, which are inspired by one of my former professors, Mark Erickson and Perry Kuiper, sort of idea of hypervisualization, and then putting all these things into a very aesthetically pleasing moment that allows people to understand these various layers that are collapsed onto each other that tell a better story of Black Miami. Separate to that, we also added an augmented reality component where each of these objects were able to be realized at full scale through these Magic Leap headsets, which allowed you to actually sit on a porch within each of these locations. Because of the visual nature of it and the massive file size, these are things that I can't show during a digital Zoom presentation. But if I'm ever allowed to come back in person, you all be able to see these things on the screen with the people. We might even have a headset with us so you can understand what it's like to be within those spaces. And so this really sort of was my launching point of that porch research. This is what started it all, this project. And so that bled into an actual built project, a pop-up porch with a neighborhood called Delray Beach in northern Miami-Dade. So Delray, like many places in South Florida, had a sundown portion of this area where all the Black people live. Those who don't understand, sundown means literally when the sun sets, you are not allowed to be in certain areas as a Black person, or you are vulnerable to crime, to arrest, or even worse, to your own death. So within this area, Delray Beach, the set, is literally called the West Settlers District. And this is where Black people found themselves. The amazing thing is there's tons of home ownership that still exists to this day. So generation after generation was able to hold on to the things that they had in this area. And they also have a very strong porch culture. So again, I have this process of documenting the areas where I go visit, where I go work. So we walked around and we took photographs of all of these porches, which might not manifest as a vertical porch, like say a Chicago or a DC or New York, where you see an abundance of steps and a plinth. Instead, it might just be the open platform with a covering and some sort of column, and then people put their chairs and they activate it in various ways. So we have to figure out, how can we take the components of this and then make it mobile? How do we take the components of the porch, the activity of the porch, the rituals of the porch, similar to dark mode, and then make it so that it can pop up anywhere and be activated? And so thus came the pop-up porch, which is an 8x20 shipping container, has been completely retrofitted, stripped down to its nuts and bolts, just the actual framing, and then completely clad in marine plywood with motor-operated doors, and obviously LED lights, which again become activated and show, so that when it's when it's done and it's put in various positions, you can see that this porch components finds itself all over the city of Miami. So sometimes it's used for photo shoots, other times it's used for dinners and for events. And you see on the left in its closed state, and on the right in its fully open state. And then more recently, I've been working through, again, same trajectory, but always trying to find what are the various components of this area that I haven't quite flushed out. So if dark mode was an ephemeral version of the porch, if the pop-up porch was a physical mobile version, and the porch is the tree, is the watering hole, is telling the story of the actual physical shotgun home itself. So this is Sis Trunk Boulevard. This is in Broward County. Many people who've maybe never been to the US, never been to South Florida, Broward is maybe 30 minutes north of Miami. And there's a historic street called Sis Trunk Boulevard, named after the physician, Dr. Sis Trunk. Similar to Delray Beach, similar to South Miami, this was the only area that Black people were allowed to live. So today, it's at risk, it's vulnerable, it's currently being gentrified. And to give you some reference, there's literally a road that splits the Black area of Sis Trunk from the more affluent area of Broward County. So as you can see, very far away from the water, very far away from amenities, very far away from affluence. So again, there's always this sort of splintering that's happened through South Florida, that if you're Black versus if you're not Black, unfortunately. And so on the side of historic Sis Trunk, many people lived in shotgun homes. Those who don't know what a shotgun home is, a very linear housing typology derived from Western Africa through Haiti into New Orleans. And those West African locations, it might be called a TK, T-I-K-A-Y, all the way through South Florida, all the way through the South, where not only did it find itself in New Orleans, but through Houston, through Alabama, through Arkansas, all these southern states have this housing typology. It's one of the few examples of a distinctly Black architectural contribution to the American architectural language and history. And so as you can see, all the rooms are single loaded. There's a corridor that takes you all the way through, giving it its nickname of a shotgun, where you can shoot a shotgun from one porch all the way to the back porch. And so my idea was, as an exhibition designer, can I take this typology, which is iconic in this area, redistribute it within the actual space, and those rooms becomes the site of the exhibition. So you can see bedrooms have been shifted, kitchen's been shifted, the porch, the living space. So we literally built it. So we took the actual plywood, which would clad the house, we unfolded it, so we created all these locations. As you can see on the left-hand side, cloth sway on the front porch. You see the pictures and images that are in the bedrooms. You see the poem in the foreground, which is another bedroom. And the walls that are erected will be the walls of the actual shotgun home itself. We have more walls in the background. This tells the story of historic Sis Trunk. We walked around to various families in the neighborhood and asked them for their personal photos, so that each of these individuals, again, anthropology, feel as though they are a part of this exhibition, because they are a part of this exhibition. This is their legacy. These are their stories. These are their historic images. This exhibition would not be possible without their contributions. And so all of these things are embedded within the larger gallery. And the focal point of that gallery is the series of chairs under the title, Uneasy Lies the Head That Wears a Crown. And these are the chairs that pay homage to the the Caribbean culture of celebration. And for many of you who may not be familiar, junkanoo bands are huge in Bahamian culture. The UK has a very big Caribbean culture as well, and that culture manifests often as carnival. And so how do we take carnival and then turn that into these objects, these design objects that many people immediately identify? And so we're looking at what are the striking things from here that we can take, the striking symbols, the feathers, the crowns, the masks, all of these objects that signify celebration. And we turn those into chairs. And so the base of the back are hair picks, iconic. The crowns of each of these hair picks reference many of those images that you saw before. So you see the feathers, you see the walking sticks, you see the crowns. And in the end, they become these chairs, they become these thrones that people can sit in. And the woven pattern on the seat references the hair that oftentimes is policed as a Black person. Fortunately for me, my hair isn't policed, it's very short, but I have many friends who have locks or female friends that have more abundance of hair than I do. And oftentimes that's seen as unprofessional, it's seen as uncouth, it's seen as unregal. And so I really wanted to take all these things and then mold them into an object that really exemplified and celebrated Blackness. Again, always talking about celebration. There's a full series. You're seeing the front, the back. Each one of those woven patterns are completely different that match a different type of braiding technique. Each of the backs reference different types of crowns and stuff you've seen. And so within the larger gallery, here's the collection of the thrones together. And so we're going to pause it there. And then we're going to jump to the film that I created. So I want to talk for a second before we jump to the film. So one of the prizes that I received this year was the Architectural League Prize of New York. And with that prize, you're given $2,000 and you do an exhibition. And because of COVID, the exhibition was supposed to be completely online this year. To which I responded, I already have a website. Why do I need to make another online exhibition of my work? Can't they just go to my website? I said, I want to make a movie. And the curator said, okay, sure. And I think they assumed I was going to make an architectural film where you hear my voice talking about, well, this is a porch. This is a step. A tread is this depth. A riser is this height. When you put all these elements together, you're given this space that is so important. To which I responded, I don't want to do any of that. I want to make a movie. I don't want to say a word. And so we made a film, hired a director, hired a film crew, and we made a 6-minute movie called You Can Always Come Home, which completely explains the work that I do without you ever having to see my face. So with that said, I'm going to hit play on the film. I hope you all like it. And once we finish the film, we can have a conversation. Thank you.
Let the rhythmic chatter mid-range hums and high laughter lead you. Left slide stride into a cadence of knees knocking and hips synchronizing with trade winds. Slide right into the vestibule, chiming between our house keys, backdoor key, mailbox key. Miss May came out to make sure I made it home all right.
Ooh, child. Hey there. I nah.
Unlock, twist the knob, open, walk in. Tension. School clothes still on back. Slide step to toss my book back. Last step to sit cross-legged. Pause. Pick up the controller. Resume. Tension. Mom side eyes my entrance. She pulls away from the pot to remind me I have a job to do.
Boy, if you don't get this mess off my floor, and come give me a hug. I've been snapping peas since this morning. Soaked my greens and baptized my chicken in vinegar and lemons. Don't go turning on that TV before you come into this kitchen. Wrap your hands around my abdomen. Try some of these beans. Make sure there's enough salt in them. You smell like outside. Are you tracking dirt all over my floor? You know this was my grandmother's rug. Haven't I told you before? You take years off your life when you don't listen to your mama. Wash your hands and put some more tissue in the bathroom from the hallway closet. Pull out the gold tablecloth. Grab $5 for a watermelon out my wallet.
I pounced up with no question above my crown and followed the sweet noise of bursting bubbles. I slid right to the porch. The commute was interrupted by a knuckle sandwich from my uncle. Stop by laughter and leave my baby alone. I proceeded macho.
Slide, stride, strike, step.
Outside. The minute I dapped the group up, I cursed sailor-like. Bagged on the people they love most. Took notes, left the crowd with no one noticing, made it right and lost my way. Stuck my nose in business where it didn't belong. A staircase, overcooked sidewalk, an alleyway. Familiar places you describe vividly as unsafe. I jumped off the porch but left your directions.
My child. Built from crabgrass and concrete. You are constructed of things that can't die, so I won't let you. Pick up your feet. Put one slide in front of the other and follow the walk up to my porch. You ain't gonna be running in and out of my door. My protection works best when I can see you. Find solitude in these walls. Just come home when I call. Come home after the street lights have come on, when the moths at night play a dangerous game with the porch light. Come home. Sit down and sit up. Look at how we have made room for you. We watch you gather mangoes in your shirt, hover over fireworks and dance in the sprinklers, my child. Let me feed you. Field foods to fuel you. Never forget how you did backflips in my yard with no gloves and no guards. So, unlock, twist the knob, open, walk in, and remember your job. To kiss my cheek, hug me, keep my rug clean and steal a piece of cornbread when my back is turned. You were created on good intentions, on prayers both exalted and silent. You can always come home. I'll be waiting for you right here on this porch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. I mean, the work itself was amazing, but I think I loved how you started the lecture by taking it back to your thesis project. And I'm a big believer, actually, that everyone's practice really begins from that thesis project. And like so many of the ideas that inform our future projects come out of our final kind of student projects, but we're not necessarily aware of it at the time. And it takes distance and reflection to kind of realize that. I'm still unraveling ideas from my own projects. So I love that you began that way, also because some of the people in the audience are students, and I think that's really inspiring for them to hear. But then I think also that in the face of so much resistance to your project, and I still find it shocking that people were telling you your project was racist, that you were so resilient and believed in it so much that you not only argued for it and persisted with it, but you also created a whole other project out of these articles and the conversations that you weren't able to have, to at least be able to have them in some form. And that became part of this project. And I think it really, on so many levels, advocated for a very different role of the architect to really engage with issues of race. And how can we not? It's like an inherently political discipline, no matter how many people try and say otherwise. And so I guess maybe to start the questions, it would be great to hear you talk a bit more about the role of the architect and how that's changing, and how your practice actually can provide a very different way to engage with those topics.
Sure. So I'd like to say that the thesis was extremely difficult. It was intellectually difficult. It was emotionally difficult. There was a point maybe right before midterm where I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. Like I physically had objects, but it wasn't anything I was happy with. It wasn't anything that made me excited. I just thought to myself, I think I bit off something bigger than I could chew. I was like, in my quest to piss off this other professor, I've lost myself in this project and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so my thesis advisor, who's still my friend to this day, I saw her 2 days ago, Jennifer Bonner of Mall, she pulls me to the side and she's like, Germane, if you're not pissing people off, you're not doing this project. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, this project is about pissing off people. And everything you've done has been safe. You're literally running counter to why you're doing this. So either you're gonna be brave, do the project, or let's do something else since it's midterm and you got 8 weeks to finish. And so that was my Neo in the Matrix moment where the buzz went off. I realized I don't have to dodge bullets. I can just stop them. And so in that moment, I was like, all right, I got this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. And I just started randomly emailing other professors because I was like, who can I talk to that knows what I'm trying to do? So I wrote Milton Curry at the University of Michigan. Was like, you don't know me. You don't know I exist, but you're a Black dude doing work similar to what I'm trying to do. Do you have time to help me with my thesis project? And he gave me the best response ever. His response was, Blackness in architecture, I can't ask that in an email. Here's my cell phone number. Give me a call and we'll have a conversation about it. We had a 3-hour conversation about my thesis. And to this day, that's why when students have the courage to write me, I always answer, because I was that student who had to build up the courage to ask someone else who didn't know me to help me. And he did it. Didn't ask for anything. Just said, all right, that's all you need. Hung up the phone, said, good luck. And so that project really let me know the agency that I have and that I can really do this on my own and figure out a way to sort of build this into my work. And so now to answer your question, I didn't fully grasp all of that until I moved to Miami and started doing the work in Opa-locka. That's when I finally learned that so much of this work isn't about saving people. So much of this work is about working with individuals. We have a very unique skill set. We have a fantastic skill set, a very well-rounded skill set that allows us to help individuals. It doesn't allow us to save individuals. And oftentimes we frame things as professors through pedagogy as problem solvers, as here's the thing, I will give you the solution. I've just fixed everything. And once I realized that's not my job or my capacity, and instead work with people and then give the knowledge I have to buoy the solutions that they already have in their minds, that's when I found the best way to do my practice.
Yeah, I feel like I've nodded so much, my head is gonna fall off because I agree with everything you're saying so much. I mean, I totally agree, especially the thing about the problematic nature of a lot of architectural teaching, that we're here to be some sort of problem solver, because obviously issues, especially issues of race, are so complex. Architecture is never going to solve them, but we have to engage with them. And I think that's a huge difference. And I love what you said about replying to emails, because I think a lot of people on this call there are a lot of emails I can never reply to, but I will always reply to student emails. I remember being in that position and sending these cold emails out there, because it's about creating community. And I think that's what also really struck me about your work and the film. And all, even in the titles of the projects, it feels like coming home, or you feel like you're already part of that community. And there's a real sense of that being created, which is really powerful. Anyway, I have like a ton of other questions I could ask you, but Sophia has her hand raised. So
Sure.
Sophia, go for it.
Thank you. It was so great to follow the work, and I think I agree. Like the way you've built it up, I think creates kind of an argument that connects everything together. I just wanted to say how great it is that you're picking small objects, like objects that could be weird or insignificant to someone who hasn't spent time with the specific community, like the hair combs. And allowing those to be both what they are, something very specific, very connected to a culture, to a race, but also you're kind of able to kind of elevate them to a point that they have a different meaning. Like people, regardless of their skin color, they can kind of connect to them, create a dialogue. And I feel like that it's more of a comment rather than a question. I really feel not being a minority myself, like I feel so liberated by your work, like being able to I think you're allowing everyone to have a conversation about things that are difficult to address. And I think it's extremely important. I think that's why we understand your work as care, to be able to create a framework within which that conversation can happen and can push kind of in a post-race moment. We're not there yet at all, but we can start imagining that there is a point where that can happen. And I think that's really rare. Like I'm both as a student, but also as a tutor myself, like it's really hard to find a balance and be able to be engaged, but also be super respectful and find that right distance in order to address things like that. Like, for example, I'm thinking a group of students last year were looking at the third word in Houston.
Yep.
All three of them Mexican American, like mixed heritage, and it was extremely interesting to kind of how they were dealing with to understand that kind of different culture themselves, being from a very distinct culture in the States. And I actually felt really useless. Like I didn't know how to enable that conversation at all in order to allow some productive fusion. And I really think that your work does that, allows for that place to emerge. Here's a question. Are you aware of that? Like, is it something that you can take on specifically? Because I understand that some of this work kind of comes not thinking like within this framework. I think, could that be something that you kind of take on
Sure.
moving forward?
So it's the work I do is deeply personal. It requires a massive level of vulnerability. And me and a lot of my buddies, who none of which are architects, actually, have these conversations, right, about appropriation. And they're always like, how much of the story do you want to give to the world so that they see, like, they can peek behind the curtain? Like, how much of this stuff do you want people to know, and how much do you not want them to know? And so there's always a sort of delicate balance between, all right, I can show you all the hair pick, but I can't give you all the seats of the hair pick. I can show you all this porch space. I can't tell you everything we do on the porch, right? There's always this sort of negotiation between access and denial. And when is it too much where it becomes, all right, none of this is mine anymore, it's the world's. And so I'm always trying to figure out, how do I do that? And a lot of times I found it's easier to do through these small artifacts, because these are artifacts that transcend culture and ethnicity. It's something that brings us all together. And instead of always propping up trauma and here's a disadvantaged neighborhood, let's design a community center, or here's a vulnerable city underwater, let's save everybody with floating cities. It's like, well, how can I talk about the things we do amazing? How can I talk about the spaces that we manipulate into something so much more that are so innovative and creative because of all of these unfortunate traumas, right? Like I prefer to single it from that perspective, because then we can have, in my opinion, more interesting conversations. Because I don't need to talk about a city that's collapsing. Like everybody knows that, it's there. But what are the people doing within those spaces that are so like amazing that no one knows about? What about the family that feeds 80 million people out of their back porch as a pop-up kitchen? To me, that's way more interesting to talk about architecture than the fact that the foundation is slipping. We know the foundation is slipping. We know climate change is real. I don't need to be an expert on that. But what I can offer is all of these little sort of micro instances that sort of tell a more complete story of the built environment. And so that's what I take on, like 10 minutes. That's what I can take on, which then allows me to be a storyteller, or in West African terminology, be a griot, or use architecture as a griot. And that's typically what I try to do a lot of times. Like, how do I allow architecture to tell stories? How do I let design object to tell stories? And so far, I've been successful. None of this stuff is easy. I've been also very lucky. Like, I realize there's a lot of serendipity within all of this, right? Some of that is the time, some of that is the culture, some of that is the world. I think when you put all these things together, it coalesces into my practice. But I think at the root of it, it's because I've allowed myself to be vulnerable within these spaces, which is often something that we don't do.
Definitely. There's another hand raised, so Shaiko, I'm unmuted you if you want to ask a question.
Thanks. I think Sophia pretty much summarized the effect or the significance of this kind of work, because this is great, and especially like for a student like me, because I'm from South Africa, and for a long time, especially in the 90s, even until now, in the 90s it was more of a big thing, but I'm discussing or trying to discover what a post-apartheid identity is and how to express that through architecture, and not just museums and not just but in your everyday life, like how it comes into like the
Where in South Africa?
Where in South Africa am I from?
Yes,
I'm from Bloemfontein.
Okay, I only asked because my first internship was actually in Cape Town, so I lived in South Africa for 4 months. Yeah, and I worked in Khayelitsha.
Oh, cool. There actually are some projects in Cape Town that bridge, like, anyway, sorry.
Apologies, yes, I saw that. I just had to bring that up.
No problem. I just realized that this question might escape me if I don't. But like, I've enjoyed the fact that you've brought your individual, but also kind of not necessarily saying that you speak for the people necessarily, but kind of like how you've related a story, like Sophia said, basically, like you've related something that otherwise wouldn't maybe either have significance to somebody else who doesn't know about that sort of, the culture of another's perspective or something. And I've enjoyed that you've been able to relate it in such a way. And so this leads to my question now, like, where to from here? Like, what are some of the things that you imagine or hope or dream that you could do from here on out, with, like, if you use this as a starting point, or if there are other ideas that you have, or like, where would you take it where to from here?
Sure. So I have a couple ambitions and a couple things I'm actually working through. So the Wheelwright Prize that I received and the Rome Prize were based off another trajectory of research I'm going to explore, which is African diaspora contributions to classical architecture. And so I'll be in Rome for 6 months, understanding North African occupation, the contributions to the column orders, in hopes of actually creating the new column order derived from Blackness. Separate to that, I'm really interested in spaces, with the idea being that once I've explored each of these spaces individually, it'll become sort of a Black House series, similar to like the modernist case houses. What happens if I do the same thing based off of sort of Blackness throughout the US and throughout the diaspora that way? And so I've explored porches, I've explored kitchens. I'm about to start exploring structure with columns. And then next it'll be bedrooms and living rooms. And then once I put all these things together, what does a house look like from that perspective? And then separate from that, I still do regular architecture. So like, I have a house that's in construction currently, it's like 70% done. I have another house that's in design development, where I had a conversation with the MEP engineer last week on site. And I'm still doing this type of work in communities where I had a call last week with a bunch of Black church leadership because we're figuring out a way to repurpose many of their parish halls and community spaces so that it's more holistic within the actual neighborhood for those who might not feel as though they need to be spiritual or religious to then still occupy those spaces. So it's a combination between like these more exploratory research, small scale installations, which are like, here's my story as a Black person separate from a story from someone from New Orleans or from the UK or from South Africa. But then also here are the things we all have in common. And then separate from that is the actual built objects, which again, as an architect, that will always still be the core of what we do. But my goal is to do that with more care and more collaboratively than just me walking in and saying, I know all the answers, let me do everything. And then you all will be happy with the result.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. And because you use the word care, I think I loved the fact that, and I think picking up from the last two questions as well, that you changing really the value systems around which architecture or as a discipline is operating. And I think this, like not only just noticing and drawing attention to the objects that could otherwise be overlooked, but also changing, like, as you said, like it's not useful to point out a city that's collapsing. Everybody already knows that. But how do we celebrate the amazing things in culture that, like, everyone should know about? And I love in the lecture description, the words you used were about like kind of celebration, love, delight. I just spent 2 years working on a project about delight. And so I think why aren't those words they're currently being spoken about more because we need to hold on to those, like to have some sense of hope that we're going to come out of this situation. But how do we change the kind of value system that architecture for so long has been organized around? And it was really interesting to hear you speak about these projects about new column orders and a new house series, because those are like projects that, will beget more projects. They kind of are generators and they create systemic change. And so, I was just wondering, it's like a huge project practice, like kind of shift that you're I guess part of and initiating in many ways. So like, I think that question of value systems is a really fascinating one. So I just wondered if you wanted to speak more about that, because I know you're running out of time.
Sure. So the value system thing is sort of based off how I was raised, to be honest. I say this at every presentation I have or any opportunity. I have a bunch of women to thank where I am at this point in my life. This isn't me pandering at all. I have 4 older sisters. I have a grandmother who loves me dearly and a mom and aunts who have all been instrumental in me getting here. And at every single phase of my career, it's been a woman that's helped me get to the next point. I mentioned Jennifer Bonner when I was in grad school, right? And once I finished there and came to Miami to the project, it was Stephanie Williams Baldwin who helped me understand community development. And then from that point forward, it was Amanda Williams, and it was Mabel O. Wilson at Columbia who selected me for the MoMA reconstructions, like that historic thing. It was always a woman. And unfortunately, when you think of femininity, the words like delight, care, et cetera, always ones that are attached to those for good and for bad. And I know as a male, why would I walk around perpetuating tropes of you have to be strong and you can destroy everything? And it's like, when inside you're crumbling. Because I was crumbling during my thesis proposal. So instead of putting forth a fake facade of what people expect, I'm like, I'm just gonna do what I was taught. And this is how my female professors have all taught me. And so the Barbara Besters, who's one of my mentors, and the Ingalil Walrus Ritters, who's one of my mentors, they've all taught me through this idea of self-reflection and through identity. And that's borne out into the work to where when I have students and I'm a professor, I bring those things into the academic environment. Because if I continue to put forth the way I was educated in undergrad, I'd be breaking models, telling people their projects suck and you shouldn't be an architect. Because these are all things that I was told. So, I had no desire to perpetuate the things that I hated. My thing is, how can I change those things and then help put forth something different as a pedagogy? And I've been successful so far. I'm 35, so I know I'm pretty young in this whole thing, but I'll figure it out.
I think that's, a really inspiring note to not maybe end this conversation, but just pause it, because we're definitely going to make you come to the AA in person in the future.
I hope so. Yeah.
And I just think that, there's so many more things that I kind of want to chat to you about. So hopefully there'll be a part 2 to this conversation.
I hope so. And the part 2 will have all the stuff back from Rome.
And yeah, exactly. And as Shumi says, we all have to sit on some porches together.
Yes, yes, yes.
And Rome is a flight. It's a small flight to.
Oh,
London.
I know exactly.
So we can lure you to the rain.
Please do.
Once you get to Europe.
You're already being asked to teach a unit or a summer school in the chat. So just
I see.
Once you come into the AA's orbit, we don't let you go. So thank you so much, and thank you for making the time to do this in what seems like a very busy day for you. So
no problem at all.
Hopefully see you soon. And I might try and do this thing where the only way to break the monotony of Zoom is to try and unmute everybody to give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.